George MacDonald was a theologian in the 19th century, and this is what he wrote. No words can express how much the world owes to sorrow. Most of the Psalms were born in the wilderness. Most of the epistles were written in a prison. The greatest thoughts of the greatest thinkers have all passed through the fire. The greatest poets have learned in suffering what they taught in song. In bonds, Bunyan lived the allegory that he afterwards wrote, and we may thank Bedford Jail for the Pilgrim's Progress. Take comfort, afflicted Christian. When God is about to make preeminent use of a person, he puts them in the fire. So, when you're ready for God to use you, be ready for things to get difficult. This is the way that typically is done. And this morning we're going to see that in the life of Joseph. So if you'll turn to Genesis chapter 40. Joseph has been sold by his brothers, and then after arriving in Egypt was sold to a man named Potiphar as a slave. Then Potiphar's wife found him attractive, and through a whole series of events he gets falsely accused and ends up in prison. So he's gone from family to slave to in charge of Potiphar's house to prison, much like a roller coaster. Now I always find this fascinating. We say life's like a roller coaster. Because the reality is, with a roller coaster, it's not the high points that are great. You endure the tick, 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 tick for the downhills because you get enough momentum to go sideways or do the loops, or I know some of you don't do roller coasters, and I'm so sorry. But in life, sometimes we're at those low points in life, and this certainly is one of those for Joseph. So he finds himself unjustly in prison. Now, when God works in our lives, oftentimes it involves people. Matter of fact, most of the time, God's work in our life involves people, other people that He brings in and out of our lives, and that we're in contact with, and so sure enough, it starts off Genesis chapter 40. Sometime after this, so as in prison, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. So Joseph, because he is honest and trustworthy and hardworking, always seems to rise to a position of authority, and such is the case here. But let's talk about these guys that we have. I always think of the butler, the baker, and the candlestick maker. I don't know why, but anyway. So we have the cupbearer and the baker. So who are they? Well, really throughout all of history, kings have enemies. There are external enemies, that's obvious, but there are also internal enemies. And there are people oftentimes who want to assassinate the king, maybe their own family, so they can ascend to the throne, or someone doesn't like them, or whatever it is. And so there are a lot of different ways to assassinate a king, but one of those, of course, is through poison. So kings would have a cupbearer, and the cupbearer's responsibility was to drink from the cup before the king would, and to eat some of each item on the plate before the king would. And if the cupbearer fell over dead, then they knew it was poisoned. Not exactly, the job you aspire to. And so the cupbearer was the guy, that's what he did. Can you imagine the job application? Someone to get to drink what the king drinks and eat what the king eats, and as long as you don't die from poison, it's a great job. That's sort of kind of the way it works. So that's the cupbearer. Now, as you can imagine, a cupbearer is a confidant of the king because he's with him all the time. Every time the king's thirsty, he's got to sip it first. Every meal for the king, he's got to partake of it before the king does. So the cupbearers were very close and oftentimes had a lot of influence with the king of the country. In this case, it's Egypt, so the king is Pharaoh. Now, the baker, that's a little bit more obvious. That's the person that cooks the food, but let's think about it. The baker could also put in poison, especially if the baker and the cupbearer are kind of in cahoots there together. And so for some reason, we don't know why, these two guys, the cupbearer and the baker, Pharaoh is angry with them. And so he confines them both to custody. Now, notice it's called the house of the captain of the guard, the prison where Joseph was confined. You're aware that there's always different levels of a prison, and there are different types of prisons, and this one probably is a minimum security prison. Joseph is sort of in charge of the thing. When I say it's not a bad prison, I do realize there's no such thing as a good prison. But I really, it could be far worse. They could be chained up to a wall in a dark dungeon, dingy kind of place. But they're not. It seems to be not too bad a place, at least as far as prisons would go. And so they have brought them in. So this is what I want you to see. We have Joseph, we have the cupbearer and the baker. None of them are here by accident. All of this is a part of God's plan. All of it is a part of God's purpose. And Joseph being in contact with the cupbearer and the baker is a part of God's plan. You never know when God moves people in and out of your life what sometimes He's doing. But He does. I mean, look, how many of you have ever gotten somewhere in life because you knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody? I mean, that's how God oftentimes works, is through connections that we have with other people, as He sends other people into our lives and we interact with them. And so it's the same with Him here. So listen, the primary character in this account is not Joseph, it is God. Matter of fact, the entire Bible is about what God is doing. He is the primary character, and He is the one that's making things happen. God never says, "Whew, man, that came off better than I thought it would." God never says, "Wow, I was lucky that worked out." Like, it's not like that. God is always in charge. And sometimes in His preparing us to do something with us or through us, part of getting us ready is different people that come into our lives for God to accomplish His purpose. I knew a guy, literally, I still know him. I know a guy who was at a conference. When the conference was over, he just happened to be in a seat on a plane next to someone else who was at the conference. And the someone else just happened to be the president of a seminary, which is a graduate school for pastors. And so as they began to have a conversation, the president said, "Yeah, we're in the middle of searching for 2 or 3 different professors." And this guy said, "Well, hey, I know a guy." And he put down a name and a phone number, and 6 months later, that dude was here in Arizona teaching. Now, I hear preachers tell these stories all the time. I think, yeah, right. Like, right. Reality is, it's the only time in my life ever God has done something in my life with my name and phone number on a napkin. Like, this is not the norm. I'll be honest with you. This is not the way God usually does it in my life, but I can tell that's the only story I've got like that. I know you hear preachers, they make it sound like this just happens all the time to you, everywhere. It doesn't happen, not to me, but it did happen that time. And so, 2 guys are not accidentally at the same conference and accidentally on a plane together and accidentally have a conversation and accidentally put a name and phone number on a napkin. Like, God is in charge of everything. This should make us feel, it's okay if you say amen, unless you don't think God's in charge, which probably should say, oh my. And so, God's going to use these people and Joseph with what's going to happen in Joseph's life as God is preparing him for what He's going to do. So beginning of verse 5, we're going to see that when God uses us, He gives us the ability to interpret other people's dreams and predict the future. Not always, but that's what happens here with Joseph. So verse 5, and one night they both dreamed. Now who's the both? Well, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. Each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. Meaning they didn't have the same dream. There are different dreams with some similarities between them. I just want to stop here and say a couple things. In the ancient world, dreams were considered extremely important. In most cultures, it was believed that the gods would oftentimes communicate with people through dreams. As a matter of fact, we've actually uncovered a dream manual. It's like an encyclopedia of how to interpret dreams. It's about 800 pages long. They were considered very significant. There were actual religious groups that were dedicated to interpreting dreams. So they're very, very important. In the Old Testament, there are a few dreams that are mentioned and God communicating through them, but there are 2 particular circumstances where God uses the dreams of non-believers and a believer to interpret them to accomplish His purpose. Joseph and Daniel. And so they're here and they have the dreams. Now, I also want to say it's really interesting the way God, again, puts people together to do what He wants to do. So several years ago, I was reading one of these passages. I thought, dreams. I've never really studied dreams. I think I'm going to study dreams in the Bible. So, like I was just jot a note. Actually, I don't jot them anymore. I just pull out my phone and put a note down. Hey, study dreams. And so when I got a little free time in my life, I started kind of doing some research on dreams in the Bible. And I was like, man, this is actually pretty interesting. And those are the sort of things that once you start down that road, you can't detour. At some point, it can even obsess you if you're not careful. And so I'm studying. Well, I had to go to a meeting at the main campus for the school I teach at. And while I was there, I was introduced to a couple of our PhD students. And one of them and I were just kind of got into a conversation. He said, so what do professors study? And I said, well, it's interesting. Yes, right now I'm studying dreams in the Old Testament. It actually come out to be pretty fascinating. As a matter of fact, I think that someone could do a PhD dissertation on dreams in the Old Testament. So we kind of hit off, exchanged numbers. A couple weeks later, I got a phone call, said, hey, would you mind if I took your dream idea and did my dissertation on dreams in the Old Testament? I thought, that's great. He said, and would you be my chairman? So I chaired a dissertation of the guy who's the world's leading expert on dreams in the Old Testament. Now, I'm not going to give you the whole 175-page right here. But it is interesting. And it was not by accident. I'm reading the Bible. God says, hey, why don't, God just kind of flicked my interest in it, and then I was able to pass it on. It's that's how God works. It's just always cool to see him doing that. And so these two dudes have their dreams. So verse 6, when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. Now this just cracks me up. They're in prison. Of course they're troubled. So he sees they're troubled. Now, how does he know that they're troubled? Well, verse 7, he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in the master's house, why are your faces downcast today? We can still see it. We say something, is everything okay? Are you all right? We see it on people's face. We know something's wrong. And so Joseph says, is everything okay? And they said to him, we've had dreams, and there was no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? So really nobody can interpret them. God has to give it. And he says, please tell them to me. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me. And on the vine there were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Now this is a great message for the cupbearer. It's pretty obvious what's going on. But what about verse 15? I found verse 15 interesting. I was stolen, and I'm in here, and I'm innocent. Now let's think about the cupbearer. Let's assume you're the cupbearer. Joseph is a prisoner. And shocker, we have a prisoner who says, I'm innocent. Now, I do know there are people who have been falsely imprisoned. I realize there are innocent people, and we should do everything we can to try as a society to ensure that never happens. But, there have been a lot of prisoners over the years that said, I was innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. So I wonder if the cupbearer hears Joseph say this, and maybe he's thinking, I wonder if he really can interpret dreams. The dude's a prisoner. But he claims to be innocent. I'm sure Joseph's not the first person who ever said he was innocent in prison at this point. We certainly know he wasn't the last. So I just sort of wonder what the baker and the cupbearer are thinking when they hear a fellow prisoner say, I'm innocent. And it kind of just gives a little sort of different perspective on this. But when you read these verses, let's just be honest. You think, that's never happened to me. Actually, it has happened to me. I have had dreams. How many of you have ever had dreams? Here's the real question. How many of you remember your dreams? I remember maybe a couple a year, and it's always so weird and bizarre. And when I've had one of those really weird dreams, here's what I think. What did I eat last night? And then if I share them, typically with my wife, you know what our first question is? what did you have to eat last night? Like, that's kind of like, man, I must have, or is there something on your mind that may have spurred this sort of dream kind of thing? So that's kind of, this is not really kind of the way it normally works. However, God is working. And as a matter of fact, if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, this is not normal. God doesn't normally work this way. And here's the really cool thing about that. What if there was a normal way that God worked and it was the same all the time for everybody every time? It would be boring and you would never trust God because you'd already see it coming. But the fact that there's variety creates, I think it's really cool because we have a God of such variety, but also it forces us to trust God because we don't know how He's going to do it next time. We don't know how He's at work sometimes even right now. There are lots of different ways then that God works in your life and mine, and Joseph just happened to be this way. So my family would love to play. And we just play. I was raised playing games. I play games all the time like kids. Most of you play. If you have people over for dinner, when dinner's over, what do you do? When we have people over for dinner, when dinner's over, break out the cards. Everybody ponies up some cash? No. But yeah, people, you play. That's what we do. We like to play games. It's a way of kind of creating some community with people. So one of the games that we like to play is Settlers of Catan. So how many of you have played Settlers of Catan? Okay, we have a few blessed folks. The rest of you, I'm sorry. So it's really interesting. The goal of Settlers of Catan is the same goal in every game. And what is that goal? To win, yes. Y'all were not as confident as the first service. The goal of every game is to win. You play the game to win. That's the goal. I get that. However, every game kind of has different rules, and the definition of winning is different. That's why we have different kinds of games. But Catan is very interesting because there are a multitude of ways that you can win. Now, you win by getting 10 points, but the way to get there, matter of fact, if you go online and do a Google search, Paths to Victory in Catan, the first website you come across will give you the 5 paths to victory in Catan. The next website has 103 paths to victory in Catan. I don't know how the first guy missed 98 of them. But there are lots of different paths. Matter of fact, I took a picture of a victory with only 2 settlements. I did it with victory cards. I did it with longest road, largest army, and you don't have any idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, it was a very unique way, a very unusual way of winning. And so I took a picture because I knew it would never happen again in my life, and sent it to people that I know that played. Here's the thing: there's only one goal: God getting glory to His name. But there are a lot of different paths for God to accomplish that. And so when God's at work in your life, there are going to be different ways that He does it. In this case, it happens to be in prison, which is not the normal way God has worked on my life either. Some people go, man, God really worked on my life in prison, but you don't keep going back to prison over and over again for God. It's different every time. And so God has a lot of different paths of working our life. In this case, He happens to use Joseph and the dreams of the butler, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Now, verses 16 through 19 tell us why Joseph is not ready yet for the way God's going to use him. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he's excited. He thinks he's going to get something good too. So he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. Man, there were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for the Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Just like with the other dude. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. I tell people, I speak English, Hebrew, and sarcasm is my heart language. My whole family is ridiculously sarcastic. And I don't just mean my immediate family, I mean my extended family. People that marry in had better learn to handle it quickly or they're going to be in trouble. I mean, if you ever say just something nice to someone in my family, there's a long pause. There's no thank you. There's just a long pause because we're waiting for the stinger. Our family is just ridiculously sarcastic. And we don't know really any other way to communicate with each other well except to be sarcastic. However, I know that there are times in life when sarcasm is not the best way to communicate. And may I submit to you that this would be one of those. I mean, hey, 3 days for you as well. And Pharaoh's going to lift up your head too. And man, the baker's like, yes. He goes, yeah, from off your shoulders. Like this is, and I just wonder if there's a snide little, like we discover here, Joseph's kind of a punk as a teenager, and apparently some of that's still around. Like he's still not ready yet for what God's going to do in his life. And we get this. We get that, it's interesting. People oftentimes will pick their doctor based on bedside manner. I'm going to be honest with you. If they're going to be cutting on me, I don't care what their attitude is. I want the best. I mean, I want the best. As a matter of fact, how am I even going to know? I've never had surgery, but I'm aware of this, that when you have surgery, they actually put you out. Like you have no idea what the doctor's personality is. I'd hope he wouldn't be laughing while I was doing surgery, but I'm like, why do we do that? Because even though we want doctors who are great, we also want doctors who have at least a little bit of humanity in them, a little bit of compassion, a little bit of grace. And so, Joseph here shows no humanity, no compassion, no grace. He just kind of laughingly, sarcastically tells God, look, you're going to be dead in 3 days. I've said for years, if I had been a medical doctor, and there ain't not a chance in the world that happened, but had I been a medical doctor, I would have been an OBGYN. Because usually it's good news. It's a boy. You're going to have a baby. Now I realize that sometimes it is bad news. But I have an unbelievable amount of admiration and respect for people like oncologists who day after day after day, week after week after week, year after year, for their entire career, have to look at a family across the table or in the chairs next to them and say, I'm sorry, it's cancer. To be honest with you, I cannot imagine the toll that takes on a person. The weight that they carry. Maybe in some sense you have to almost cut off some of that humanity because you care, but the burden of just over and over and over again. And can you imagine, just stop and think for a minute, what it would be like to be a doctor and look at someone and say, the tests have come back, we've reviewed all the scans, and to be honest, you only have a few days left to live. You need to go home and set your affairs in order because you'll be gone by the end of this week. I don't even know how, I don't know how you do that. I cannot imagine, when you stop and think about that, it gives you a tremendous amount of respect for those in that field who have to do that on a regular basis, and particularly those who deal with children. I cannot imagine what it must be like. And I just say, you should pray for them. Because even as non-believers, that is a tremendous challenge and difficulty to have to live life that way, to deal with that. And so, we expect doctors in that situation not to use humor or sarcasm. Like Joseph shouldn't have been like this. He's not ready yet. And it shows up here in the way that he says this really sarcastically, lightly, meanly to this guy. So, verse 20, look what happens. Because now we're going to set the stage, but we're also going to be reminded, Joseph's not ready yet, and the timing is not ready yet. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, so we know from history that kings would oftentimes release a couple people from prison for their birthday. Which means if you went to prison, it was better to go to prison a couple weeks before the king's birthday than like the week after, because you had to wait 51 weeks to find out if you might be one of those that got sprung. So anyway, on the third day was Pharaoh's birthday. He made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Joseph is not ready yet, but it's not time yet for what God is going to do with him in this situation. Now I want to let the cupbearer off the hook a little bit. For many years I thought, it's kind of cruel. How can he forget Joseph? Then we think about it. What has Joseph done to help the cupbearer get out of prison? Nothing. It's like Joseph said, hey, I know somebody that knows the warden. I'll put in a word for you. Hey, I've got a good lawyer, and I've given him your case. It's not like Joseph hasn't done anything. He interpreted a dream, tell him what happened, it would happen. But he hasn't really facilitated the cupbearers getting out of prison at all. And what's the cupbearer going to do? He's standing there next to Pharaoh and so, hey, Pharaoh, I knew this dude in prison interpreted dreams. Pharaoh's going to look at him and go, that's a little random, isn't it? Like, how does this come up in conversation? You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, and so I think sometimes people are a little bit hard on the cupbearer, like, like he's ungrateful. There's really not a whole lot for him to be grateful for at this point. And so he probably shouldn't have forgotten Joseph, but I could see how he would forget Joseph because in the flurry of everything going on, being restored to his position, I could kind of see how he could miss it. But I want us to just, Joseph is not ready yet. There's some things God needs to do in his life. He needs to get rid of a little bit more of that kind of mean streak he's got, a little punk streak that he's had now all these years. And he's not there yet because of the timing. So, I want to give you a little more backstory. Yes, someone put my name on a napkin and my phone number and gave it to seminary president and ended up coming out here. There's a whole lot more to it than that. I felt from not long after God had called me in ministry that I wanted to teach. Felt like it's what God was calling me to do. And so I followed that kind of educational path that you have to do to get there. And I graduated seminary, and I was now at Dr. Smith, which is like the funniest thing you can ever imagine. Like, people that know me are like, I'm not really sure he's a doctor something or other. And so I'm the Dr. Smith now, and then it happened. Ouachita Baptist University announced they had an opening for an Old Testament professor. So, well, okay, that's great, but here's why that's so significant. Ouachita Baptist University is where my mom graduated, and her sister, and my brother, and my other brother, and my sister, and my wife, and me. They owed it to me. We have since had a daughter, a son, and a daughter-in-law all graduate from there. Trust me, there's no punch card. Buy 10, get one free. It doesn't happen. But I mean, man, this is the school I graduated from. I'm an alum. It's 45 minutes from the town my wife and I both grew up in. It's my field. I mean, there is nobody better for this job than me. Nobody. It's perfect. The head of the department, very, very close friend of mine, one of my mentors in life. I mean, this is the ideal. I am the right guy. Have you ever been in a situation where everything fell into place? You're like, this is perfect. This is so obviously what God wants. It's just like, you might as well write it in the sky. And they didn't hire me. Came down to 2 candidates, me and one other guy. The other guy had been teaching there for a year. 1-year contract, had developed some friendships. Half the faculty voted for him and half voted for me. The department chair cast the deciding vote in my favor. And the president said, I'm not sure I want to bring somebody in with a divided faculty. So both of us were a no. Man, I was devastated. Do you know why? Because God messed up. He missed a golden opportunity. I mean, what? It's so obvious. How many of y'all, God's ever messed up in your life? Remember, lying's a sin. Okay? You're like, we can't say that in church. God never messes up. God never goes, oh my. I know that. But you cannot tell me that there aren't times in your life when you've thought, God missed this one. God messed this up. How in the world could God let this happen? This shouldn't be. It ought to be this other way. It just seems so obvious. And here's the way that it goes. When we look back in life and we see those situations, we realize, by looking back, God actually did know what he was doing. At the time, it seemed to me like God had missed it, that God had messed up. He had missed the golden opportunity. What was he doing? If he hadn't been so busy doing something else, he'd have made sure that this happened. Like, that's the way we all kind of think. But then when we look back in life, we realize, no, I now see what God was doing. There were some things in my life that I needed to go through as a pastor to really be able to be a professor so I could bring those things into class to talk to students about them and about how to handle those kind of situations in church life. So I wasn't ready yet. The second thing I discovered was the timing wasn't right. And here's why. Because that was Ouachita Baptist University. And what I discovered when I got hired by Gateway Seminary is that I don't do well with college students. I don't teach at that level. I teach at a level for master's and PhD students. That's where I am the most comfortable because I tend to be pretty rigorous is a nice way to put it. It's not usually the word students use, but anyway, the toughest prof I ever had is normally the way it's described. And I'm telling you, I really admire people who are unbelievably brilliant with a PhD that teach 18-year-old freshmen 3 times 3 is still 9. I mean, they think up here, and yet they can put the cookies on a shelf down here for college students to get it. And I just, at the time, it seemed like the right spot, the right time, everything seemed right. And now looking back, no, that would not have been a good fit. And so now I realize, God's pretty smart. Like, he really knows what he's doing. The fascinating thing is the longer you live, the more faith you should have in God, because the more history you have in your life of seeing that God was smarter than you. God knew what he was doing even when you didn't know what he was doing. You have more time to reflect on those things, and it should build and increase our trust and our faith in him because we have seen God doing, all of this. And then, we also discovered that we're kind of really fit for desert life. People ask, where are you from? Arizona. You don't sound like it. I know, I talk normal. The rest of you have an accent. So, oh no, you know where we're originally from Arkansas. But this is where we've been for 2 decades, where we raised our kids. This is where we're from. The expectation is this is where we'll end. I like to say end, but I don't like to say die, because I'm hoping Jesus comes back before then. That is still an ending per se here, so that's, But so when you read this, do you think Joseph, a year after this, is thinking, why didn't God send somebody who would remember me to interpret their dream? Joseph was probably thinking when he interpreted these dreams, man, he's going to tell Pharaoh, I'm out of here in a couple of weeks. It all seemed like it fit, doesn't it? And then here he is. It's going to be a couple of years before God really actually starts to use Joseph to accomplish his purpose for all the people and for Egypt and all of that. Joseph doesn't know all of that. I'm sure he's sitting there thinking, man, what in the world is God doing? But later in his life, he can look back and say, I see now what God was doing. God sometimes leaves us in the fire because we're not ready yet. Sometimes God leaves us in the fire because it's not time yet. But when you're in the fire, trust that God knows what he's doing. Have you ever thought about this? Why in the world did Jesus come when he did? I mean, why do we need Isaiah? Why couldn't Jesus just have come then in the 8th century BC? Or why not David? Why do we need David? Why didn't Jesus come then? Or how about, why not, let's go back, why not Moses? Why do we need Moses? Why didn't Jesus just come then? Or why about Noah? Why in the world didn't Jesus just come back like the week after Adam and Eve ate from the banana tree? Like, why did God wait so long? Why do we have all that Old Testament stuff? It's 3/4 of your Bible. I mean, why didn't he just come sooner? Seems like it sure to make things easier. It would seem to be the more logical option, wouldn't it? Well, there's a reason why. Because God knows what he's doing. And it wasn't time yet. Matter of fact, here's how Jesus put it in John chapter 7, verse 8. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. I still have more ministry I need to do before I'm crucified, is what Jesus is saying. Jesus didn't just come into our world and get crucified. We got to go almost 3.5 decades before that happens, because there were things that Jesus needed to do. He said, I must needs go through Samaria. I have an appointment there, is what he was saying. So even in the life of Jesus, there's a right timing. But there's more to it than that. The Bible in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4 says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. What is the fullness of time? It's fascinating that Jesus came when he did, because almost all of the known world was unified. No matter where you lived in the majority of the world, you spoke your native tongue and Greek, because the Romans dominated the ancient world and they spoke Greek. The Romans had a road system so that you could move. In other words, the early Christians, no matter where they went, they had a way to get there because of the Roman roads, and they had a common language. They could cross borders without any kind of border guards or any problems because all of it belonged to Rome. And so Jesus was sent at the optimal time in history for the message of the good news of what he had done to spread throughout the world. God knew exactly what he was doing. God always knows exactly what he's doing. And I'm telling you, when Jesus comes again, it will be not a minute too soon and not a minute too late. God knows exactly when it's going to happen. And it will be the right and perfect time, even though some of us wish it'd get here a whole lot sooner. You say, what do you mean? Well, I love what the Apostle John said, even so, Lord, come quickly. A week and a half ago, they numbed up half my face and went in to do a root canal. And then the doctor says, You don't like when a doctor says, And he says, just stay here. I'm going to get one of our other dentists to come and see if he can do this. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this sort of stuff, but I know that's not good. So the other dentist come in, he jabs and pokes, and he says, we got to drill a bigger hole. You don't want to hear that either. They do some more drilling. He goes, no, I can't get it. So my dentist says, well, I'm going to give it one more shot. Paul, if you're a praying man, this would be a good time. So he feels like, he says, look, bad news. He says, we just can't do it. We can't do it. We're going to send you to a specialist. So I'm like, great. So a couple days ago, I was at the specialist. Same thing. Man, I'm telling you what, it's really difficult when half your face is numb and you're hungry and you're trying to eat and you're just dribbling. And, I bit my lip, my tongue, and my cheek. I was 3 for 3. And I mean, they shot all the stuff in there, and then he's poking and jabbing, and then you hear those words, that's not good. I don't care what kind of person it is, if they're working on any part of your body and they say that's not good, that is not good. Of course, I'm sitting there, I've counted all the ceiling tiles 100 times by this point, and then he sits me up. He says, well, I think we're done here. I'm thinking, man, that'd be the quickest root canal ever. And he says, we can't do it. And I'm like, wow, so I've been numbed, drilled, and stuck twice, and the result is a hole in my tooth. Man, this is just great. You know what I thought? Lord, this would be a good time to come. They're not going to be in the dental work in heaven. Because somebody needs to say amen or hallelujah right here. Be careful, your dentures might fall out, but I'm telling you, there won't be any dental work in heaven. And 2 months from now, I guarantee you, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of students in high schools and in universities who are going to be praying, even so, Lord, come quickly, because I don't want to take finals next week. I mean, Jesus coming back will be great the week before finals. And there'll be some professors praying it as well, because then we don't have to grade them. And so, but he's going to come back. You and I don't understand. Sometimes I look around and think, this would be a really good time for Jesus to come back. This would be a really good time. You get a news report and you think, this, even so, Lord, come quickly. I want you to know, God will send Jesus back at the right time. We're not ready yet. The timing is not ready yet. God's still got things to do in your life. God still has things to do in my life. And sometimes that's something on me personally. Sometimes this is about timing. But either way, sometimes we think, God missed that chance. It didn't go like I thought it would. Didn't go like I hoped it would. Didn't go like I think it would. Sometimes I just feel like the baker. I feel like it's the greatest news in the world followed by from off your head. I sometimes just feel like that. Let me tell you, God never makes a mistake. God is always at work in your life. God is preparing us. He will use us for His honor and for His glory in His way and in His timing. Do not lose heart. Do not lose heart. Do not give up. Our God has a plan, and it always in the end is good and great. Thank you. Our Father, I know I've not been through what Joseph's been through, never been to prison, never interpreted dreams. Some of this is it's not the way you normally work in the Bible, and not normally work in my life. But the fact that you do work in my life is very clear. It's very clear in your word that you're a work in us, and that sometimes we need to go through the fire. We need to experience difficulty and challenges because we're not ready yet. And sometimes we need to stay there a little longer because the timing hasn't happened yet. Just like Joseph's going to spend a little more time in prison, spend a little more time in the fire. So God, I pray that when we think, man, this is it, and it turns out it's not it, and we're disappointed, frustrated, and heartbroken, remind us that you are a God who's in control and you know what you're doing. And help us to look back and to see in the past how you have been faithful and knew what you were doing, so we can trust you to be faithful and wise in our lives now and in the future. Help us to trust you and what you're doing for your honor, for your glory. For it is in Jesus' name that we ask it. Amen.